Today we are looking at a case from the 21st century, so sit back as we go to England. Shafilia Ahmed was born on July the 14th, 1986, to parents Iftikhar and Fazana Ahmed. Her parents were originally from the village of Uttam in the Gujarat district of Pakistan, but after an arranged marriage, they moved to England. Originally, Iftikhar had strongly opposed to the union, as he was in love with a non-Muslim woman. Whilst travelling to Copenhagen in the early 1980s, he met a Danish lady named Viv, and later he married her and had a son. His family, however, did not accept the marriage and did not consider that Viv was actually his wife. About 4 years later, Iftikhar returned to Pakistan to visit his sick mother. Whilst there, she reminded him that he'd always agreed to marry his cousin, named Fazana. The marriage had been agreed for Fazana for most of her life, and if it were not to happen, Fazana may have been shunned by her community. Adamant to persuade Iftikhar to follow through with the marriage, Fazana became emotionally unstable and a danger to herself and others. Reluctantly, under the immense pressure put on him by his family, Iftikhar agreed to marry Fazana. After the marriage, he returned to England alone and convinced his Danish wife and son to move from Denmark so they could all be together in the hope of starting a new life. Soon after, a very pregnant Fazana arrived to live with them, and Iftikhar introduced her as his cousin. However, following a visit from a health professional, Iftikhar admitted to Viv that the baby was his and that he had married Fazana during his time in Pakistan. In the wake of this revelation, Viv left him and returned to Denmark with their son. After the birth of Shafilia, the couple moved to Warrington. They went on to have 4 more children. Their children were raised with very strict religious and cultural ideals enforced by their parents. Fazana made sure that her children had a very strict upbringing. She was a traditional housewife and expected all of her daughters to follow suit. She was extremely stern. If her children fell out of line in the slightest manner, she would get angry, and her punishments were often very harsh. At the age of 11, Shafilia fled from her home for the first time, establishing a pattern that she repeated throughout her adolescence. She did this in a bid to gain an independent life, away from the physical and psychological torture that she endured at the hands of her parents. Shafilia confided in her friends and revealed to them how she had to live under very strict rules, and if she ever disobeyed her parents, she was always punished. Growing up, Shafilia was an intelligent, sensible, and well-behaved child, with ambitions to one day become a solicitor. But as she grew older, Fazana and Iftikhar believed that she was being influenced too much by other girls her age, and they found this unacceptable, especially as they had tried so hard to raise her in a far more conservative way. At the age of 16, she finished secondary school with very good grades, but as she entered the next stage of her education, she began missing lessons. She also started to spend time with non-Muslim friends. She dressed in more Western attire and started wearing makeup. She also spent time talking to boys in her school, an action particularly despised by her parents. This all resulted in many arguments between them. Her parents would tell her that she could not act like this and that she was bringing shame onto the family. Shafilia's parents took her on a trip to Pakistan for an arranged marriage to her 25-year-old cousin. Once they got there, her passport was confiscated. Prior to this, Shafilia had repeatedly rejected her parents' plans for her to marry a man of their choice. During her time in Pakistan, she swallowed some bleach, which was later reported as a potential attempt to take her own life, and resulted in Shafilia being ill for a long time, and on her return to England, being hospitalised in Warrington. The man she was supposed to marry soon backed out of the arrangement. This angered Shafilia's parents tremendously, as they believed that she had again shamed their family. Fazana and Iftikhar, however, blamed the incident on their daughter mistakenly picking up the wrong bottle during a power cut. Over the following months, The arguments and physical abuse increased, but Fazana and Iftikhar would keep up appearances to hide the abuse from the school, social services, and the police, by insisting that they were victims of racial prejudice and Islamophobia when awkward questions were asked about why their daughter was missing school and often had bruises on her face. On the 11th of September 2003, after months of abuse, an argument erupted between Shafilia and her mother over 17-year-old Shafilia's choice of clothing: a t-shirt, tight-fitting trousers, and high heels. Shafilia was picked up by her mother from her part-time job, and when she saw what her daughter was wearing, she was furious. The argument began in the car and continued at the house, with both of her parents in the presence of her 4 young siblings. The next day, the 12th of September, Shafilia was absent from school and from work. This continued for the next week. No one had heard a thing, not her friends, teachers, nor work colleagues. Not a single one of them had any clue where she could be. Her teachers eventually contacted the police, as they were seriously concerned for Shafilia's well-being. They all knew that she had previously arrived at her lessons with fading bruises and had a history of long periods of absence. The police immediately contacted Shafilia's parents, who claimed that they had not reported their daughter missing, as they believed she had simply ran away, like she had done so many times before. The police questioned her school friends and work colleagues. They did not have the slightest clue as where Shafilia could be, nor did they know if she had had any plans to run away. Her siblings were also questioned, and although they seemed as though they knew more than they were letting on, they told the police that they did not know where their sister was. Throughout the investigation, Fazana and Iftikhar remained very calm. It was as if they had no concern for their missing teenage daughter. After continuing to speak to Shafilia's friends, teachers and colleagues, the police's suspicion of Iftikhar and Fazana increased as they learned more of the abuse that Shafilia had previously suffered at the hands of her parents. The police, however, were aware that they would be unable to obtain a confession directly, so instead they planted a recording device in the Ahmed home. From this they were able to hear Shafilia's parents talking. They discussed whether the police would find any forensic evidence in the car. The police also heard them tell their other children not to say anything at school or to their friends. However, nothing specifically was said about the whereabouts of Shafilia. With this information, the police decided to arrest Iftikhar and Fazana on the suspicion of kidnapping their eldest daughter. And while searching their home, the police noticed that all of the family photographs that contained Shafilia had been removed. They continued to question the pair, but they denied anything to do with their daughter's disappearance. The officers, however, were convinced that something was not quite right about their statements and became even more suspicious when the couple never referred to Shafilia by name and only ever referred to her as the girl or the child. As the search produced no new evidence, the police released the couple. In February 2004, 5 months after the disappearance of Shafilia Ahmed, a body was found in the River Kent, near Sedgwick, in Cumbria, in northwest England. It was heavily decomposed, which made it very difficult to identify. However, with the aid of dental records and by identifying the jewellery on the body, the police were eventually able to confirm that it was the body of Shafilia Ahmed. A post-mortem exam was carried out, but it was unable to determine the exact cause of death. However, it was confirmed that Shafilia had been dead since the time she was first reported missing. The police considered that the deceased girl's parents, Iftikhar and Fazana, were responsible for her death, but the evidence against them was only circumstantial, and they did not have enough to charge them with the murder of their daughter. The couple agreed to a series of television interviews, where instead of mourning the loss of Shafilia, they perpetuated a narrative stating that the police, in labelling them people of interest, were acting inherently racist, although there was a growing suspicion surrounding them regarding her disappearance. The pair used the issues of race and religion to their advantage and said they were being unfairly suspected. No new leads or evidence emerged, and the case stalled. 6 years later, in 2010, Shafilia's younger sister, Shafilia Ahmed, was arrested in connection to an armed robbery at her parents' home. Shafilia was at university, and with the increasing pressure of funding her studies, she orchestrated a robbery at the Ahmed house. Shafilia would be at home with her family when her friends, 3 masked men armed with a gun, a hammer and a metal bar, would break in, tie the family up and steal jewellery and cash. However, they tied up everyone except Shafilia, and this raised the suspicion of her parents, who soon became hostile towards her. When the police arrived at the house, Shafilia was arrested under the suspicion of having a hand in the events and was taken to the police station for questioning. Initially, she denied any involvement. However, text messages between her and the robbers surfaced. While in custody, she requested to speak about another matter. It was here that Shafilia revealed to detectives that her parents, Iftikhar and Fazana, did in fact commit the murder of her sister, Shafilia. They did this in her presence and in the presence of her 3 siblings. Shafilia, after years of silence, had suddenly become a key witness, and this was the break that the police had been waiting for in the investigation. Shafilia detailed the events of the day, September the 11th, 2003. She said that her sister Shafilia returned home from work in clothing that infuriated her parents, and this was the breaking point that led to her unfortunate demise. Her father then proceeded to physically abuse her, while her mother held her down, preventing her from escaping. She said that her mother shouted, "Just finish it here." Shafilia and her siblings then watched in horror as her parents suffocated their older sister. Iftikhar and Fazana then instructed their other 4 children to keep quiet about what they had witnessed, or else they too would meet the same fate. Later that night, Shafilia looked out of her bedroom window and saw her father carry a body-sized bag into the boot of his car. After outlining this to the police, Shafilia was put into a witness protection program out of fear that other family members would retaliate and come after her for bringing shame on her parents. In September 2011, due to Shafilia Ahmed's statement, Iftikhar Ahmed, age 51, and his wife, Fazana, age 48, were charged with the murder of their eldest daughter, Shafilia Ahmed. Another one of Shafilia's sisters, named Mevish, had met up with a friend shortly after witnessing Shafilia's murder and confessed to her what she had seen that night. Mevish also wrote letters to her friend, extensively detailing the events. The friend had kept a diary at the time, in which she wrote about her meeting with Mevish and talked about how she learned that Shafilia was killed by her parents. Following Shafilia revealing to the police that Iftikhar and Fazana were responsible, Mevish's friend decided to go to the police herself and give them all this information. She then became another key prosecution witness. The trial began on May the 21st, 2012, at Chester Crown Court in Cheshire. Several documents proved vital, including photocopies of Mevish's friend's diary entries, as well as Mevish's letters, which corroborated Alicia's story. These were all used in evidence by the prosecution. With all the evidence presented, on July the 9th, 2012, Fazana changed her witness statement and implicated her husband in her daughter's murder. She had previously claimed to know nothing of Shafilia's disappearance, but now said that Iftikhar alone attacked her. She also stated that she had attempted to intervene, but was struck by her husband in the process. Fazana pleaded guilty to manslaughter. This plea, however, did not influence the jury, and on August the 12th, 2012, Fazana and Iftikhar Ahmed were found guilty of the murder of their daughter, Shafilia, and they were both sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. This case, being a 21st century case, isn't something that I normally do on this channel, but I had received many requests to cover this case, so I decided that I would do it. I'd be really interested to know your feedback both on this case and if I should ever occasionally do a more modern case. It will never be something I will do very often, but maybe once in a while. But I'd really appreciate to know what you think. And next week I'll be back with another historical case. So hopefully I will see you all then.